If you ask people today exactly what Alexander the Great looked like, very few can answer with certainty. If you ask what Genghis Khan sounded like, nobody knows. Yet their names remain alive. Why? Because some people stop being individuals and become symbols. And symbols often outlive the people who created them. Cyrus became one of those symbols, a symbol of power, a symbol of leadership, a symbol of ancient Persia, and perhaps most importantly, a symbol of the dream of building something greater than an ordinary life. That's why centuries after the Achaemenid Empire vanished, people were still talking about him. But this is where the story takes a darker turn, a much darker turn, because time shows mercy to no one. Centuries passed, countless wars were fought, empires rose and fell, entire cities vanished, libraries burned to the ground, historical records were lost forever. Even many documents connected to Cyrus disappeared. It was as if history itself was slowly erasing everything. But one thing refused to disappear: his name. And that might be the strangest part of all. Think about it. Thousands of years pass, languages change, borders shift, religions evolve, generations are born and die. Yet people are still talking about you. How many people in all of human history have achieved that? Probably fewer than we can count on both hands. Now another question emerges. If Cyrus suddenly returned today and saw the modern world, what would he think? Perhaps he would be amazed by skyscrapers. Perhaps airplanes and the internet would seem like magic to him. But maybe the most surprising thing would be something else entirely. The fact that people, 2,500 years later, are still debating him, still writing books about him, still creating documentaries, still trying to understand who he really was.
As strange as it sounds, sometimes a ruler's greatest battle begins after death. A battle where armies no longer matter. A battle where memories decide who will be remembered and who will be forgotten. Imagine living on a dark night thousands of years ago. There is no internet, no television, no endless collection of books. The only thing that survives is the stories passed from one generation to another. Grandfathers tell them to their grandchildren. Writers carve them into stone. Travelers carry them from city to city. And those stories are what make a person immortal. Over time, Cyrus became one of those stories. The story of a man who rose from a relatively small land and built one of the greatest empires the world had ever seen. But here's the fascinating part. Many historical figures disappear when they die. Their stories end with them. For Cyrus, the opposite happened. His legend truly began after his death. Every generation added something to his story. Every nation interpreted him in its own way. Gradually, the line between fact and legend became blurred. And that's exactly what happens to the most unforgettable figures in history. Think about it.
And that alone proves that he has not been lost to history. Many of the world's greatest empires have fallen. Palaces have crumbled. Armies have vanished. And the names of countless rulers have been forgotten. But some people seem to transcend time itself. Centuries pass, and their names are still spoken. Cyrus is one of those people. Perhaps that is the real reason for his enduring legacy. People do not remember conquerors simply because they conquered. History is filled with forgotten conquerors. But those who leave a lasting impact on the minds of future generations become legends. Whether we consider Cyrus the greatest king in history, or simply one of the most important figures of the ancient world, he succeeded in crossing the boundaries of time. Today, his army no longer exists. The splendor of his palaces has faded. His vast empire no longer appears on the map. Yet his name lives on. And perhaps that is the greatest victory a human being can achieve.
To have people, after 2,500 years, still sitting somewhere in the world and asking, who was Cyrus, really? And as long as that question continues to be asked, the story of Cyrus will never truly end.
Today, that might not seem extraordinary, but 2,500 years ago, such actions were highly unusual. That difference is one of the reasons Cyrus left a unique impression on the minds of many nations. Interestingly, some ancient texts even describe him as a liberator. As a result, his name was not preserved only in Persian history. It became part of the history of many different peoples. But was Cyrus truly a flawless ruler? This is where history becomes complicated. Some people see him as a symbol of justice and humanity. Others argue that we should not forget that he was, in the end, a king and a conqueror. He had an army, he fought wars, and he expanded his empire. Like many historical figures, Cyrus is a mixture of reality, interpretation, and legend. But even if we put aside all the praise and admiration, one fact remains. Cyrus achieved something very few people in history ever managed to accomplish. He didn't just create a kingdom.
The story begins when the Medes ruled much of Iran. At that time, few people could have imagined that a young man from Persia would one day become the most powerful figure in the region. But history always has its own plans. Cyrus gradually gained power, gathered allies, and eventually took control of the Median kingdom. And that was only the beginning. One by one, neighboring lands became part of his growing empire. But perhaps the most important chapter of his story was the conquest of Babylon. Babylon wasn't just a city. It was one of the richest, most famous, and most important cities in the world. A city surrounded by massive walls that many believed were impossible to breach. Yet Cyrus succeeded in taking Babylon. And this is where the story becomes truly fascinating. Normally, when a great city fell, massacres, looting, and destruction followed. But according to many historical accounts, Cyrus chose a different path. He allowed the people of Babylon to continue their lives. He preserved their temples. He respected their religious beliefs, and he even freed many captives. Today, that might not seem extraordinary, but 2,500 years ago, such actions were highly unusual. Imagine that tonight, right now as you're watching this video, a name rises from the depths of history. A name that after more than 2,500 years still makes millions of people talk about it, write books about it, make movies about it, and even debate whether the person was truly great or not. That name is Cyrus. But there's a strange question. Why, out of the thousands of kings who ruled this world, has the name Cyrus survived? Wasn't he just another ancient king? Weren't their empires larger and wealthier than the Achaemenid Empire? So why is Cyrus often the first person many people think of when ancient Persia is mentioned? To answer that question, we have to travel back 2,500 years, to a time when the world looked completely different. Back then, power had only one meaning: war. Those with the largest armies ruled. Those who were weak were destroyed. Cities were conquered, people were enslaved, and victorious kings usually carved their names into history through violence. In such a world, a man emerged from the land of Persia, a man who would go on to build one of the greatest empires in human history. But what made Cyrus different wasn't simply conquest. In fact, many rulers of that era conquered vast territories. What made Cyrus stand out was the way he used power.